Hello to everyone joining us. Just give us a couple minutes to get ourselves situated and we'll start shortly. So I'm gonna briefly introduce the program, and I think that'll give Kurt just enough time to get settled and we'll get started. Does that sound good to everyone? Yeah. So I just wanna welcome everyone who's joining us today. Thank you for being here. This program is really important to me and to Bakehouse, and we're glad that you're joining us today. My name is Laura Novoa, and I'm the Curatorial and Public Programs Associate at the Bakehouse Art Complex. Once again, thank you for joining us for this second iteration of Art and Activism, Appetites to End Mass Incarceration. Art and Activism is a program that explores the intersection between art and social justice, and how art can be used in the function of community building and as a tool in advocating for and amplifying the voices of diverse communities. And today our program will focus specifically on how individuals and initiatives that they're spearheading are directed towards humanizing and building empathy for incarcerated individuals. Today's program is moderated by the wonderful co-founder of the Community Justice Project and director of global programs at Movement Lab, Meena Jagannath. Meena is a movement lawyer with an extensive background in activism and international human rights. She received her JD from University of Washington Law School, where she was a William H. Gates Public Service Law Scholar. She also holds a master's degree in international affairs from the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, and a BA in International Relations and Peace and Justice Studies from Tufts University. And our amazing panelists are artist, activist, and social entrepreneur, Chef Kurt Evans, who uses his culinary skills to rally the community around ending mass incarceration. And he's the owner of Down North Pizza, a fair wage, equitable workplace for all its employees who are actually formerly incarcerated individuals, which is located in his hometown of Philadelphia. Kathie Klarreich, founder and executive director of Exchange for Change, which teaches writing in Florida prisons. Prior to her work with the incarcerated population, Kathie was a journalist living in and reporting on Haiti. And Angel Sanchez, a volunteer and board member with Exchange for Change, who served over 12 years in Florida state prisons. And this past May, Angel graduated from the University of Miami School of Law in the top 10% of his class. So congrats, Angel, on that. I'd like to welcome and thank deeply Meena, Kurt, Kathie, and Angel for being here with us today to elucidate us on a difficult and contentious topic of mass incarceration and its racial, economic, and social consequences, as well as the strategies used to educate the public and push for an end to mass incarceration. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank Bakehouse's Executive Director, Kathie Klarreich, and my colleague, Ricardo Moore, who helps us with communication, marketing, and development initiatives. For the ongoing and critical support we receive, the Bakehouse would like to thank its private and public sponsors, including the Knight Foundation, the Paris Family Foundation through Curarte, and the Miami Foundation, Miami-Dade County and the Department of Cultural Affairs, and the State of Florida and its Division of Cultural Affairs. And lastly, just quick housekeeping. I'd like to remind everyone to please save questions for the end. Feel free to ask any questions or share any comments in the chat box to the right-hand side of the screen. Or for those watching on Facebook Live, please leave your questions via the comment section. Once again, thank you for joining us tonight. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook for information on future virtual programming and Bakehouse artist updates. And I'll hand it over to Meena. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura, Kathie, and Ricardo for having us and for setting this up. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. I was just wondering, I mean, I know Kathie, and I know you, Angel, as well, and Kurt, we're new friends, but I was wondering if you could start us off by just telling a little bit about your story and, how did you come to do the work that you're doing today to end mass incarceration and support people who are currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, those who've been impacted by our carceral system. And we can start with Angel.
Well, thank you, Meena. As you all heard, my introduction to the criminal legal system is one of direct experience. But if I am honest, I think as a child, I certainly was the victim of crimes that I would not want to have reported. Probably didn't want to report because they're family members, and unfortunately, the carceral system gives us an all or nothing proposition. Either rip you up with your family, throw them into a prison, or nothing. Then witness crimes around me, which I think were a reflection and a result of extreme poverty, lack of hope, learned hopelessness, and whatnot. So witnessed crime as well, and then started getting incarcerated around the ages of 13 as a teenager, but do remember being put in handcuffs when I was 9 years old. In the 4th grade. So those were my introductions to the criminal legal system, and one that at every step of the way felt normal. Now I am world apart from where I came. I got into experience a different Miami. I got into this experience a different world, and realized how abnormal it was. But for me, it was very much a very normal world. So for me, it was one of for lack of better words, a prison to school. A school to prison pipeline. I say prison to school because that's what I'm trying to create, a prison to school pipeline for many others that are coming out. So that's my introduction to the work.
Kurt.
Just like Angel, my introduction to the work, witnessing crimes, have 5 uncles, all of them who have served extensive time in prison. So growing up and, family members are in and out of prison, introduced to it that way. And then as you get older, you start understanding the criminal legal system and the systemic issues that have on communities, lack of resources. So those were things that helped me get into the way of teaching people of mass incarceration, using food as a vehicle instead of a supplement to the conversation.
Kathie?
Yeah, mine is a much more circuitous route because I didn't have any relationship to the criminal justice system growing up at all. I grew up in Ohio in a upper middle class neighborhood, and I think my consciousness was raised when I started to live in Haiti and worked as a reporter. And when I moved back to Miami, I wanted to work with the Haitian community, but not in Little Haiti where there were a lot of Haitians already working. And so I looked for a place for the underserved population and went to the women's prison and asked if I could teach a writing course for Haitian women in the prison, and they thought it was a great idea, only not enough Haitian women signed up. And so I started teaching writing for the general population, and that actually was the beginning of, I think, my real maturity in understanding the discrepancies in the criminal justice system by working from the inside out.
Thank you for that grounding. Since today's panel is called "Appetites to End Mass Incarceration," let's talk about food. And I'll direct this question to Kurt. How has food become an entry point into the conversation on ending mass incarceration, and what is it that sort of drew you to trying to figure out how to use your culinary skills as a way to attack this issue or address it?
Well, to me, food was a easy way into teaching people. You know, sometimes you can't get people together over coffee. Everybody don't drink coffee. Not everyone has like alcohol, liquor, but food is an equal something that everyone, you know, will divulge in. And it was so historic to me, as far as in thinking of the Black Panthers, Georgia Gilmore, people like these people who use food as a social tool to get things that they needed done, even for the Black community, even dating back to slavery time, you know, to plan meetings, escapes, and everything, you know, happens like over food. So food was it was something easy for me to get involved, but I'm also I'm understanding of how to be in space and not take up space. So a lot of my friends who have issues throughout the criminal legal system, I have them curate the dinners. So I'll bring the food and someone brings you their stories, their problems. Not every story was I have friends that are, you know, been in the criminal legal system and are actually lawyers, pastors, youth coaches, things like that. And I had a few dinners where people had drug rehab, alcohol, drug rehab addiction problems. So, you know, we let everybody meet people where they're at and tell their story. So that's what, you know, we use the dinners for, because, you know, you can meet someone who's like, oh, he's a really good guy, and not know he has a criminal past of being like a lawyer. So yeah, that's why I started doing the dinners.
And just a quick follow-up to that, I read in the piece that Kathie had written about your work about the chi-chi sandwich. Could you tell us about the sandwich and possibly how you incorporate that into the dinners as a way to raise awareness?
So when my uncle came home from prison, one of my favorite uncles, he came home from prison, and he would eat chi-chis all the time, and I didn't know what it was. It was like, oh, this is a cool little snack that he was just making all the time. And when I had got into a position of and I mean, the chi-chi was I've seen that done as a kid until I became a chef and working in kitchens where you can work in the culinary industry, and a record doesn't actually affect your chances of actually making it in the culinary industry. So I've worked with a lot of people that had been formerly incarcerated, and I took the initiative to hire a lot of people that were formerly incarcerated, and that would be just a snack some people will be making. And me just being a chef, not culinary trained, classically trained through culinary school, but I staged under like many of chefs. So just to see the technique of it done, knowing some people put mayonnaise packets in it as a binder because it has egg in it. So things like that is very, 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 very it's just so genius to like the chi-chi, the commissary cake. I had a cousin who actually is like, yeah, I used to make pizza. I was like, please tell me, how did you make pizza? So it was just things like that was just like so like, you know, amazing. And it's just like, you know, you would think like you see these shows like Cutthroat Kitchen, all of these shows where chefs are trying to create things, and these people are, I mean, these wonderful people are going into like a commissary and just like, I'm gonna take this and take this and take this, and they make something out of it. So yeah, so the chi-chi is usually always a conversational piece. There's always the first bite, is the emuse, is the first bite, you pick it up. And the first time I ever made it, I had my friend who was there, who did 12 years in prison, and he was like, oh, we would have never had it this good in prison, but you got to dumb it down a little bit, because I chefed it up too much. I put like a little green little scallion on top, and it was just like, no. So then I had to go back to like the way my uncle would make it. So made it, kept it original.
That's awesome. Angel, how does that resonate with you? And also as someone who is currently working with returning citizens, how, what do you find the same trend with respect to the culinary industry as being more welcoming to people who are coming out with records?
Yeah, I actually, when I heard Kurt mention that, I still remember sitting in the day room in one of the prisons I was at in the Panhandle, somewhat near to the end of my sentence, and it was this individual who had become a culinary chef in Las Vegas and had become popular, and so he made it into like the evening national news. And I remember it was his story and maybe a handful of others that inspired me to think that one can go from prison to arguably quote unquote success, and being an example. And so there was something in me when I saw that I felt I would love to be able to do that for someone else who will be sitting in a day room somewhere, who I might never meet, but I could hopefully inspire and impact. And I think it's examples like those that did play a role. And yeah, and culinary arts, I think, is one of those places where you can have somewhat of a closer true meritocracy, where your skills and your work can actually pay off a little more. So I definitely agree with that. I think coming back though to the inside experience of the carceral state, one of the reasons we don't see a lot of educational programs, there's a handful of them, but one of them is because the state depends on the people's labor within the prison so that they don't have to hire folks to do that. And now during the times of COVID, when folks are quarantined, officers are being forced to cut grass, to pass out food, and to do certain practices that were often placed on the shoulders of the people that are incarcerated. And it's frustrating the officers. They're mad. It's beneath them to do this work. But the reason I point out this fact is because if we had to pay people for the work they do, already a ballooning budget of prison would break the bank, if you will. And so why I say that is because when you have such a necessity for such prison labor, you have a deterrence to have these people being in the classroom educating or learning a trade. So for a prison of 1,200, you might get 120 people who can probably get an education, but they can't afford these folks not to be working. And one of the places where a big industry in the prison that folks are forced to work at is food service. They're forced to work in the kitchen. And so that's a skill that folks are picking up by forced labor, but in the process, they are getting a skill that then when they get out, hopefully they can leverage. But a lot of times, I think the food, while you can be a chef, a lot of times it's the application process. Like sometimes I could get the skills to be a nurse, but would a hospital hide me? Would the fancy hotel take me on, right? And that's a challenge that one of the things we're hoping to put pressure on out here is to get vendors who use labor from folks inside to hire those same folks when they get out. Because if they were qualified to cook in there, if they were qualified to do nursing services for folks that are in the infirmary, they should definitely be qualified to do it outside. So those are the things that come to mind. I think later on, I also want to talk about the punishment of food, or how food is used as punishment inside. Because I think it's a beautiful thing that we're talking about, how we could use it to empower and be conscientious of how it's used to dehumanize and disempower.
I almost want to come to that now, but let's let Kathie come in here, because I know, Kathie, through Exchange for Change, your organization, you are constantly in contact with people on the inside, and this COVID period has been particularly difficult. And I think from my conversations with you, I know that there has been a lot of talk about the way that this pandemic has impacted food and the extent to which people are getting nutritious food. So I just wanted to give you a moment to talk about what it is that you're hearing from folks on, you know, how this pandemic has particularly impacted, you know, people's access to healthy food and nutrition while they're incarcerated.
Yeah, so for context for the listeners, we're working in several prisons that have about 1,500 inmates in South Florida. And one of them in particular has a bad reputation, I think, in general with how it's managed. And the problem is that if someone is infected, they may not want to stay because they don't want to go to quarantine in confinement, because the situation there is also really dire. So they shut down the entire quad, right, which could be 60 guys. And we're talking about lack of social distancing because of the very nature of the way a prison is set up. So if you have two people in a 6 by 9 foot cell, there's no way that those two people can be separated. Or you have an open bay where you've got 60 to 72 beds all right next to each other. So they have shut down sections of these dormitories for not days and not weeks, but months. And we know of one where they were 7 to 8 weeks shut down, and meals were brought to them. They weren't even allowed outside to walk to the cafeteria. So meals were brought in, and their basically bag lunches for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And they consisted of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and bologna sandwiches and an orange, which I have to say, there were some people that were really excited because that meant they got a fresh piece of fruit, which they generally don't get. But it also meant that they weren't getting outside, they weren't getting proper nutrition, they weren't getting vitamin D from the sun. And so in addition to having all of the problems that they would normally have from malnutrition, they were then developing other symptoms because of the lack of nutrition. And these are the kinds of things that they're confronting. They also couldn't go to canteen, which is where a lot of people supplemented their food source, right? Because they weren't getting proper nutrition. Now that said, a lot of the stuff that's sold at the canteen is not good for them, but it is a perk, right? So it's something that they look forward to. And I just wanted to say one thing when Kirk was talking about this, the chichi, that's what it's called, the cheese sandwich. The only time I actually experienced anything close to cafeteria food was on my birthday a couple of years ago when they made me a birthday cake. I'm not a big sugar person, but they took their honey buns, right, which are already super sweet, and then they smeared everything they possibly could. They put peanut butter on top and M&M, like all of the, you know, and there was no way to not be gracious and accept it, but they all laughed because I took one bite and I think that my sugar, you know, sailed off the charts, and then I shared it with the rest of them, which is I think what they wanted to start with, because it was the biggest treat was for them to have all of this gooey stuff. But anyway, yeah, so nutrition has been a huge problem for many, many people during COVID.
And just following on the theme of COVID, Kurt, I'm just wondering, for you, I mean, so much of your conversations were structured around dinners that that people that, you know, that would bring folks together so that they can talk about this issue. And so I'm just wondering what are you doing in this period of time when people are not coming together in that way? How are you recreating a space where people can keep their focus on what's happening on the inside, especially in a time where, you know, as everyone is kind of focused on themselves or their family and anxious about the pandemic, you know, it's also a time where people forget, you know, those that are currently held in our jails and prisons. And so, yeah, I'd love to know what tactics or what are you, what creative ways are you carrying this work forward?
Yeah, so through my EMI dinners, I had lost my job in New York due to COVID. I was teaching formerly incarcerated youth ages 18 to 25 culinary skills for an organization called Drive Change. So, I mean, I really kind of like really missed that. I was teaching like kids like fresh out of Rikers. Like, I mean, I had a few kids from the previous They were in Rikers since they were 16. So yeah, so when I lost my job, you know, it felt good to do nothing for like the first 2 weeks, because like being in the culinary industry, you're constantly working. But during that time off, I said, you know, I can't let this stuff get me down, and I started forming together the plans for down north. So me and my partner, we owned the building for about 2-3 years. We just never got a chance to actually. We didn't have the mental infrastructure to know how to do real workforce development. We didn't want to just do regular workforce development. We wanted to actually really provide. So we came up with a plan and partnered up with a nonprofit where we're teaching culinary skills. We're going to do like an 8-week program, and we have two bedroom apartments above stairs. So 4 employees will be able to gain access to housing for free, to be able to save their money. And we're outsourcing like certain skills. I mean, certain like soft skills like resume writing, you know, just things like that. I have a friend of mine, he does finance, so he's going to come in teach finance classes. So we and I mean, in a period of a month, we got the pizza shop already up and going. Where we just launched our fundraiser campaign on GoFundMe to raise 100,000 to raise to bring in our staff for working capital. And then I started the en masse incarceration dinners virtually. So I found a way to support local restaurants and nonprofits at the same time. So I'll go to a local restaurant, one of my friends, and say, hey, can you give me a dinner per person around $30 per person for a meal for 3 and 6? So we didn't want to go too much high. We didn't really want to go too high for the dinner. So in case it was a couple of 2, they could just have dinner for themselves, order dinner for 3. And if it's about 4 or 5 people, they can order a dinner for 6. And if you have anything more than that, you can just order 3 and a 6. And the base price of it, the dinner, was about $90. We sold the dinners for $250 and $600. So the base money went to the restaurant for their materials and labor costs, and everything over the top went to the nonprofit. Any nonprofit that was dealing with any issues that have anything to do with mass incarceration. In Pennsylvania, I have a friend named Ryan Hancock. He's a pretty good attorney, a civil rights attorney. He does a lot of work in the community. He has a nonprofit called Pulse, Philadelphia Lawyers Social Inequality, and they hold expungement clinics. They're working on a lot of pardon acts for the government. So they're trying to put together. They really want to get 2,000 people in Pennsylvania pardoned a year. So yeah, we raised about $2,500 for their organization, and that allotted about I believe like 20 expungements. So we've been doing a lot of good work virtually. So we're gonna actually start a tour probably next year, working on probably like a 4 or 5 city tour, virtual EMI dinners, connecting with local nonprofits, local restaurants, and making a way for it to happen.
That's awesome. And if that GoFundMe is still going, you should put the link in the chat so folks can contribute if they're so moved. Angel, I'd love to turn it back to you to kind of get to that deeper point that you were mentioning earlier. I do think it's important to cast a light on how food can also be used as a, as a way to create division or conflict.
Yeah, so there's a handful of different examples that come to mind. I think I'll save the worst for last. And so and I don't know if there's any worse. So one of them is we know that eating is a social experience. And I think it's very important what Kurt talked about, how it gives an opportunity for people to share. Right now I have 2 nephews with me right now. My sister just got out of prison, and she can't drive because in Florida, if you have financial obligations, they'll suspend your license if it's placed in collections, regardless if you're in prison and can't pay. And so they're staying with me so that they could go to school nearby. and then they go back to their homes on the weekends. And she's a single mother with 3 kids. And one of the things that I've been intentional about is trying to have us have dinner. And so they sit down, even if they're arguing, they're having conversations that they normally wouldn't have. And when my sister gets home, she has to cook, and then she has to feed them. And it's hard for that to happen at the table. But in prison, we do it all the time. It's one of the most bonding moments when we're able to have commissary, that we prepare our own meals and eat. However, when it's time to go to the chow hall, one of the things that I still remember experiencing is it's very prevalent here in the prisons in Florida, is that you can't speak in the dining room. And so you have to sit down and eat. And folks have to sit down. And as folks are sitting down, as the rest of that line is starting to get filled, the first folks that sit down need to start getting up. And their reasoning at best is only to get it moving quick, right? And so when folks sit down, a lot of times they point, do you want to trade this for that, right? Or have to already come in with that understanding, and are prevented from the human experience, which is speaking. You know, Aristotle talked about one of the reasons that he believed politics or whatnot, it was part of a person's nature, is because humans can communicate. And so to not communicate is to not be human. And it is exactly what folks are forced to do in the dining hall. And sometimes you get picked incorrectly as having talked when you weren't talking. And the response is, get your tray and throw it away. And you haven't gotten into eating your food. And at that moment, there's some folks that have taken that as a point where the officers have crossed already a line they're not supposed to. You can't punish me with my food. But they know that the officers are not going to admit that they're being punished with their food. And so they'll tell them, throw your tray away. And they'll say, you could take me to confinement, but I'm not throwing my tray away. And they'll eat their meals, and then told to turn around and put handcuffs, and then lied on. And maybe even have to use force on their way to confinement intentionally without the person provoking it, as a reminder and as a lesson to be learned to next time be obedient. And that's one of the ways that I think it's very inhumane, that takes away. And so once I remember being in confinement, and I hate that I came to this logic, but in confinement, before we leave confinement, we are deprived of commissary. We barely could eat 3 meals a day. And those meals are soggy, they're cold, and a lot of it is not even some of the food that you might have ate. You might have traded that type of food. And so when you're leaving confinement, is a common practice that on the day that you're leaving confinement, you're privileged to be going back into open population, where your friends and yourself might have access to canteens that your roommate, your cellmate doesn't. And so it's a very common practice that the person who's leaving confinement is so happy to leave that they leave their tray to their cellmate, so that their cellmate can get a gift, essentially a blessing, and be blessed also because you're leaving. And it was at that moment that it dawned on me that folks that would fight and even force the officers, not force the officers are forcing them, but the ones who refuse to allow the officers to make them throw away their foods, would then sit in confinement on the day before they leave and give away their tray to their cellmates, right? And so it was less about necessarily the food, but what was being violated in the individual. For me, as a person that was growing up in prison, my last arrest happened when I was 16, and I was a teenager in adult prison trying to navigate that world, and getting in lots of trouble when I first arrived in prison, including what they would call special housing units around the country. In Florida, it's called closed management. For me, I was trying to navigate, and I tried to figure out how to stay out of trouble. And one of the things that I blamed myself and said, why would I fight the officers? Why don't I just throw that tray away and live to fight another day? Why would I go to confinement to then give my tray away on the last day before I get out? And that started creating a logic in me that I was less deserving of that tray, and it's okay for them to tell me to do this. That was one of the experiences. There's a handful of others, including what they call loaf. It's one of the worst things that they could do in prison, where you won't get a meal. They'll just put everything in a blender. Vegetables, beans, desserts, all in a blender, put it inside an aluminum foil. And that is what you're going to receive. And that is used against you when you have been accused of using your food to throw it at someone. And so that is used prevalently in closed management, and it's a crazy form of abuse. And so for me, I've been in 9 different prisons in the state of Florida, including closed management. There were 2 facilities that, to me, to this day, were the most nightmarish. And I've been stabbed in prison. I've been in major fights, and I could tell you that it wasn't because of any violence from other people in prison. It was when you were in a setting of closed management and the officers had that, it was almost like what you'd hear Abu Ghraib, or it's a Stanford prison experiment, but instead of for 2 weeks, extended for 12 months, or a year and a half, or for some people for a decade. And it is in those moments that you might have a lower level, so you're able to go out and you're told to go pass out laundry or pass out food. And an officer has something against that guy in that cell. But there's cameras that require that officer to put a tray in that cell. But they're going to give you an empty tray. And they're starving this person for 1 or 2 days out the week. And in a place where you're always hungry. And you are going to be complicit in putting that tray in that person's cell and not feeding that person. Or you're not, and you're going to be in the next cell, and someone else is going to be put in that situation. And when you do it, you go back ashamed of yourself, feeling like you're despicable, and then worrying that that will happen to you one day, and living in that constant torment as if you're in some type of asylum. And food is one of the things that they love to use in the process. Or another one where they act like they put the tray, and somehow the tray now comes out as if you threw it out, and now you're placed on loaf because of it. So these are some of the things that we would not accept of anyone in this country, that is constantly happening in prisons. And it's one of the ways that food is used as a punishment, obviously illegally or unlawfully. This is not permitted by law, but it's permitted by practice. But it's one of the things. So when you have this practice happening with food, you could see how other rights seem to matter less, right? When you could treat someone like this with their food, then we could treat you a lot less when it comes to your commissary, or to letters, or to pictures, or to your radio, things that are less valuable. You know, it's like they say a rising tide lifts all ships. Well, a sinking tide sinks all ships. So those are two. Before I wouldn't want to take any more time, but those are the two that prevalently come to mind.
Whew, that's a lot. I mean, the cruelty of that is just, I'm reeling, I have to say, because it's true. Like, food is such an emotional thing, and not just the food itself, but all of the social aspects that surround it, and to kind of use every element of a human being's sort of relationship to food as a way to punish is just, I mean.
And I like to add on to that. Also, somehow, how when things aren't going right, a hunger strike. You use food as that. They weaponize the food and make it a hunger strike. Now, you can't afford too many people going to the hospital and infirmary. Now it leaks the news, things like that. So I also admire how they weaponize food as a weapon. Like, we use this as our defense. And yeah, that's what I said. Food is used so many different ways. So yeah, when those were great examples Angel gave.
Kathie, you have a thought before I ask another question?
I always have thoughts. I wanted to share one of the things that was most startling for me, for somebody who was not accustomed to what it's like to be inside, is, as an instructor, our classes run for a 2-hour period. And often during that 2-hour period, either there's count, in which case they have to stay and they might be late for a meal because they can't get count right. So let's say a meal is supposed to be at 1 o'clock and it's 3 hours later, they can't get the count right. They'll eat lunch at 4 o'clock. You know, they'll eat when count clears, regardless of the time that they're supposed to eat. So that's one thing, is how irregular the food service is. And I was also really shocked when they would be released for lunch and they're like, hold on, we'll be right back. And, you know, I have 20, 25 guys in class. I mean, what do you mean you'll be right back? And they are right back, because, as Angel said, they've got 3 minutes to eat their meal, and literally 3 minutes, and then they're back in the classroom. So those kinds of things were really shocking to me, because I like to sit around and have conversations. It's the place to do that. The one other thing I want to say, just because, you know, we're a writing program, is that our students often write a lot about food. And we have a literary journal. We had a contest for the title of the literary journal. And the contest that won, the title is Don't Shake the Spoon. And I tell you you'd have to buy our journal to know why we chose it, but I'm going to actually tell you. So in the chow line, there are different things that they serve you, right? And each dish, which is kind of an exaggeration, has its own spoon size. So they're always saying to the person in the serving line, don't shake the spoon, right? Give us all the stuff that's on top of the spoon so that we get a little bit more than a flat level of spoon. So the journal is don't shake the spoon, meaning that our writers who talk about everything that's going on inside are giving you the full dish and they're not skimping.
Thank you for bringing that in here. Well, I know the time really flew actually in this conversation, but I have one last question that I'll ask before we open it up to anyone else who might have thoughts or questions for our panelists. So much of using arts, writing, the different tools, dinners, it turns on this idea that building awareness and educating the broader public will then cause folks to care, and hopefully that will lead to social change. And I think so much of my work also turns on that central assumption that if people only knew, they would do something to change the circumstances. And this is a bit philosophical, and maybe that's just where my head's at these days. But I'm just curious. Are you hopeful after all of the efforts that you've been doing to educate the public outside? Have you been heartened or disappointed? And I'm asking you just to be honest, because I think it is important to kind of use that as like a litmus test of where we're at as a society, and sort of what our imagination is about the sort of morality of our society, the moral sensibilities, and what we actually are receiving after all of our efforts.
So when I first started doing this work, it was never about, it's crazy. I get like chef activists and things like that. I just wanted to do it to raise awareness, because at the time I had the Khalid Browder story came out, 13th, the new Jim Crow. So a lot of people were educating themselves already. In the communities that I come from, they were educating themselves. So I noticed when I started having the dinners, a lot of voyeuristic white people showed up. And the first two dinners, it was just like, people were like, it was the crowd of people that was like, they go to work the next day. It was like, what I did? I went to a dinner last night and we talked about mass incarceration. And once I started like not screening, more of I Google the people that come. So if we sell 100 tickets, I'm Googling everyone, LinkedIn. We sit people a certain way. We make it uncomfortable as possible. We want you to be uncomfortable when you come to the dinners. I don't want no one to lead a dinner like, that was a good dinner. We talk. No, I want people like, wow. So we started, if you buy two tickets, you and your wife, you and your husband come, y'all sitting apart from each other. You're going to sit here. She's going to sit there. Everyone sit next to someone they don't know, have a conversation. We open it up to more of networking. We have more exercises so people can, exchange numbers with the person next to them and talk about mass incarceration outside of this dinner. So I'm optimistic about because people actually come wanting to actually know and learn. And then it's just, like I said, it was those few people that I would get, and it was just like, they just wanted to be there watching, but not too much participating, things like that. So, and now crowd participation is a thing now. We have it. So, you have to talk about your implicit biases, things like that. So we make it to the point where it's like, you just don't come and you're just watching. So I'm optimistic about the especially in different regions. We have some progressive district attorney. I know in Philadelphia we have a really, really good progressive district attorney named Larry Krasner, and so I'm optimistic about the work. People are doing the work. People are reaching out to me. How can they help do the work? So that's important. But I'm optimistic about the future of what we're doing.
If I could share a few comments, I think I'm both, and I think I've never not been both. In prison, I was down and pessimistic about the fact that I would probably not get out to December 30th of 2028, and this was back in 1999. And also very pessimistic about the fact that I would make that release date because I knew at some point I would get more time, because there were too many incidents that would normally happen in prison that it was just almost inevitable, at least if I wanted to live, quote unquote, a comfortable life in prison. And, but I was also optimistic that I wrote a handbook on how people could get correspondence courses and that I could reach people outside the gates, or that I could mentor folks that were coming in that were younger, just like I was mentored by older folks who to this day, none of them have been released, but all of them inspired the passion for higher ed and this critical thinking. And their legacy lives through me. So I think we could be both. And now out here, in terms of knowing how prison hides people and does what it does, the first time that I ever put my purposeful narrative into academic literature, which I was hesitant to because I was told that I had to be objective, so-called, and that meant hiding my voice. But the very first time I did it thinking of Angela Davis, and she said the magic of prison is that it hides the humanity of people inside and makes you believe that it's reserved for evildoers. Essentially, the magic of prison is the hiding of what is going on inside, and then the demonizing of those who they're sending there. So my goal all the time is to invert that. My goal is to reveal what goes on in prison and then show you the humanity and the angels of those people that are inside and how we send angels into prison, right? And I know my name is Angel, but I'm speaking about the angels that are within each and every single individual that we send inside. And so because of that, I find it as a responsibility. And then finally, I like what Kirk said. It was a purpose. My purpose is to just do this work, and that is my fulfillment. But I have a goal, and I'm happy when I achieve them. But when I'm not achieving them, I'm also happy doing the work. And I think back to the times of this country, its darkest moments have created the ground for our greatest heroes. And so no matter that gives me hope that darkness will never overtake us, no matter how bad it gets. It just gives us an opportunity to see our heroes emerge and our brightest angels.
I love that. Love that. Go ahead, Kathie.
So I have a few points that I want to make, and Angel can speak on this a lot better than I can, but I am also very hopeful, but I'm also very concerned. And I'm hopeful in the fact that Florida, which was one of the few states in the country that denied returning people the right to vote, our state was able to get it onto the ballot several years ago, which would have allowed 1.5 million returning citizens to vote. And because of our current governor and the state legislator, we were having a lot of problems getting those people actually the right to vote, but we got it on the ballot. And so that raised an issue for the entire state for people to start to pay attention, because nobody thought we could get it on the ballot, let alone get it passed. The second one is when COVID hit, we knew that it was going to hit the prisons. And despite knowing that, we were not able to stop the outbreaks. We're the second or third in the nation with a number of positive cases. It's not something that we should be proud of, and something that we should continue to address. And I worry that unless we keep our foot on the pedal, that it will disappear. But I think more people now are paying attention to what's happening in the prisons than ever before. And we're doing what Angel talked about, is we're trying to bring the voices of the people out inside to the public on the outside. And we switched gears right after COVID hit. Instead of worrying about education, we worried about their staying alive, and did a a GoFundMe to get soap inside, and we're able to get, you know, $10,000 worth of soap into the various institutions across the country. There's some fights that we are still trying to get the public to understand. We're in South Florida. There is no air conditioning in the prisons in South Florida. And anybody who has been in South Florida in the summer can understand we deal with temperatures in the 90s and the hundreds. And these people are in 2-man cells with no air conditioning or open bays with a single fan. And that is absolutely inhumane. And we need to continue to fight for that. On the good side, we have a public defender who is really active and really on top of everything, and is fighting really hard to get some changes. The most important thing that I think we can do in the state of Florida is to vote. We have to really pay attention to who's on the ballot and what kind of decisions are being made that will stop some of the state legislators from ignoring some of the issues that have to happen. We have some of the worst sentencing laws in the nation, and those need to be changed because our students and the incarcerated population are still dying from COVID, and that's unacceptable. So again, I say I'm hopeful, and yet I'm still really concerned, and I don't think that we can be complacent.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. I mean, I'll just echo that. If you care, then pay attention to what's going on. Vote, hold your people accountable, organize, get to know people who are closest to the problem. Angel, there's a question in here for you. I don't know if you saw it. It says, to Angel, what part of Florida are you from? Are you familiar with the Miami-Dade boot camp? A lot of these points about how food is used reminds me of my time there. When we went on a hunger strike, all of our dinners were thrown out and 2 cadets were kicked out and sent back to Metro West. Answer that question. And
yeah, the answer, I like to say that I was born in Miami, grew up in prison, and got to go to undergrad, community college, and university in Orlando, and was brought back to Miami to attend law school. Originally from Miami, the law took me away and brought me back to Miami. Yeah, I'm very familiar with the boot camp, not because I went to it. In fact, I preferred to take a year in the county jail before I took 6 months of that boot camp treatment because of the setup that it has afterwards with its extensive probation and supervision. And then that setup would send folks back. And if you didn't succeed in the program, you were sent back to the prison. And then you could still get the amount of time that you could have gotten to begin with the boot camp. Little did I know that the same thing happens with probation. I thought the urban legend or the legal speak in the hood is that if you get 5 years probation, you could only get 5 years in prison. I would learn different. I would get 30 years for my BOP. But yeah, I do know of the program, and I think it was very important when Kirk talked about using food as hunger strikes. It is doing that. It is removing that cloak and that lack of transparency from the prison and forcing attention onto the facility. And those are just the thoughts that I have as far as the boot camp as far as the boot camp goes. I think it's obviously a better alternative when we're talking about sending young men and women, young teenagers, both children, should we say, girls and boys, to prison, because prisons, one, are not set up to care for young folks, and they don't have the investment afterwards with the boot camp, which the boot camp of Miami did have the investment of connecting them with folks after the program. So you get a greater success rate. But that's because we're starting from the place of prison, right? It makes the boot camp a very good alternative. But that shouldn't always, that oftentimes is how we skew what our expectations are, and it shrinks our imagination because we create a worst case scenario to force us to settle for some bad case scenarios. And we should call those bad case scenarios bad and move and try to build on those so-called bad cases and make them better. So in relations to prison, certainly a better option, better opportunities for a young girl or boy that ends up in those places. But also being mindful that this boot camp comes with the mentality of abuse, but it's a state-sanctioned abuse, and it's one that is very military-like. But in the military, you oftentimes you get to choose to go there. Here, you're kind of forced to do that, right? And I don't know that I would have succeeded there. And so those are just some of the thoughts.
Thank you. And there's a comment, I think, in response to that from Holly, who says that it took them two times to make it through. Over half my class didn't make it through, and I count myself lucky for still being home. Unless folks want to get active in the chat, I guess we still have 5 minutes. So if I'm not seeing any other questions, I would, okay, here I actually see a question coming through. Can you share any thoughts on the prison abolition movement and how we can raise awareness and engagement around this among other progressive movements and individuals? And you could also wrap in that any other closing comment that you want to make in these last 5 minutes.
You know,
Kathie.
Yeah, just really quickly, I think that there's a misconception about abolition in general, right? The same way that people are talking about getting rid of the police. We're not saying that people who have committed a crime shouldn't be held accountable. What we're saying is that our current system does not work, and there has to be a better way. And we have to offer different services so that the police are not arresting people and throwing them in jail because they don't know what else to do with them, that there is a place for people who have issues which need to be addressed outside of a punitive system. And I think that that's one way of looking at what abolition means, which doesn't mean destroy what we have, but rather let's come up with something that's actually going to work and make us all healthier and safer as a community. And our current system doesn't do that.
And to echo what Kathie said about it's not so much about if you commit a crime you shouldn't go to prison. Mass incarceration is about over policing. When it's so many things. So when you hear this defund the police, it's not about the police should get any money, but it's looking at where you should take some of this money that's allocated to the police. I mean, in Philadelphia, the police department is like the only department that hasn't taken a cut since probably like the 40s. It's either their budget is increasing or it's never cut. So over policing, it leads to mass incarceration, and these are problems that should be taken a look at, far as and when you send in people to prison, also drug addiction, rehab homes, diversion courts, preschool to prison pipeline, all of these things play a big part in ending mass incarceration. I wouldn't want to say abolish prisons, because I don't think that's the movement people are talking about, but it's the over policing and mass incarceration, which is really an issue in the United States, and it's been in communities of people that's black and brown communities for the last like 50, 60 years. So
yeah, so I think I could delve into this one a little bit. I would encourage folks. I wrote a piece called "In Spite of Prison," and it was following the traditions of critical race theory and prison abolition, but it's something that was accessible to even a non-abolitionist or even an anti-abolitionist. So what I want to talk about briefly to help out, one of the things that when one is talking about prison abolition is how can we make prisons obsolete, or better said, how can we prove that prisons are indeed already obsolete? Once upon a time, our way of punishment was execution, was putting people on stocks. And we said as a society that we have gone past that. Those forms of punishment are obsolete. And we started investing and started experimenting with this new form of punishment, which became the carceral, the prison system, right? And that is how we get our current prison system. For many of us, we believe that prisons have been with us our entire humanity, but that is not necessarily true. Prisons are rather a new invention, at least as we understand prisons. But because we think that they've been with us forever, we could imagine the end of the world before we imagine the end of prisons. Right. And so that's a challenge that again, we're talking about the shrinking of imaginations because of what we have. And so when Angela Davis, she's speaking about prisons are obsolete, one of the things that oftentimes is not criticized enough is the fact that this comes to us from the black radicalism. And it comes to us from like the schools of thoughts of W.E. Du Bois And there's a democracy of prison abolition, right? A democracy abolitionist type of framework. What does that mean? It's a replacement, right? Something that takes up the space from that which is inhumane and obsolete with something that is more humane and is more current to the dignity and humanity of the individuals. What are we talking about? For example, we abolished slavery, but did not replace it with any positive institutions that could take in and allow the dignity and the potential of the individuals who were once enslaved to flourish. And so if we just, if it only becomes a negative project, we're just laying the groundwork for it to replicate itself in a new way, right? It has to be a positive project. Now, what's something that people can relate to today? Taxis are about to become obsolete, not because people went down and burned them down, but because something else came about, Uber and Lyft and all these other things. It started replacing them and creating a certain demand that they seem like a better option. And so for us, we're thinking prison abolition as it's understood today. There's many different schools of thought, but I think I'm a person of a Christian faith, and I want to live a perfect life. I may never live that, but I aspire to it. And that aspiration makes me better every day. I should want the same for my society. And so I want to abolish sin in my life. I want to abolish hunger. I want to abolish poverty. But because I can't, shouldn't mean that I don't try to make it more likely than not for any single individual. And for personal work on the ground, my practice is for every one person that doesn't go back to prison, including myself, that's one additional bed I abolished in prison. And I'll work at one bunk at a time, right? And so that's the encouragement that I would give to folks that are listening, not to get too caught up and ask yourself, would you rather have a society that doesn't organize itself the way it has? And when we look at other societies, realize it doesn't have to be the way it is. But until, for many folks, they couldn't imagine a United States without slavery. And then afterwards, they couldn't imagine a United States without Jim Crow segregation. And then afterwards, they couldn't imagine a world without prisons, right? And so we could keep doing that work. And it's on us to continue being those folks that keep pushing. And I think those are the encouraging words that I will leave you with. But most importantly, there is a history that it comes to us from a racialized, racist origins where prisons began to be used as an alternative to slavery. The second one is that we know it doesn't work, which is what Kathie talked about. But the big work is very few people. Many of us are doing the critique, but many few people are creating the alternatives, right? And so it is when we create these alternatives, transformative justice, sometimes outside of the system. And want to know what that looks like? When someone in your family committed a crime, how did you resolve it? Oftentimes not with prison and not with law enforcement. And when law enforcement came in, you probably weren't happy with the results. So there has to be a better way, or at least it's on us to try to figure that out.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it any better myself. We all have to dare to imagine and dare to dream of a different future, of a different society. I know we're already three minutes past time, so I think we do have to close. There is a question in the chat here about what types of jobs and opportunities can be offered to people, but maybe we can catch up with you, Holly, afterwards and with an answer, or if Angel, if you want to quickly address that, or Kurt even, if you have any thoughts on that, we'll give you 30 seconds and then we'll just close out, just so that we don't ignore the question completely.
Go ahead, Kurt. Close us out if you can.
Yeah, I was just reading the question in full. I said something about Buffalo Wild Wings. I was trying to read it out. What type of job? I feel as though you can, and echoing about what Angel just said about challenging us to find the alternative. So, like I said, I believe it should be more art programs, youthful art programs. Kids can do coding. When I was in New York, it was a program that actually took kids in and taught them coding. So we were teaching kids in the culinary, and then we had a few kids from the program that really wasn't interested in culinary. They went and started doing coding. They finished the program, got jobs making 60, 70K, and they just was in Rikers a few years before that. So I really believe it's, you know, you have to be in tune with listening to what their interests are, instead of, you know, forcing a lot of things on people. Because we at Drive Change, we did do the food industry, but we used our partners. We had to catch a big partner net so that we can start knowing where to send people. So it was like, hey man, you know, I mean, this is great. These are great skills. I'm learning how to cook for myself, but I'm really into something else. I like to work with my hands. I like to do this. I believe listening is the most important key, because I think a lot of times you get people graduating programs and things, and you're like, well, here you're going out to the food industry world, and it's like, you know, and then not listening can lead them down a path where they may end back up on the streets doing what they were doing. You know, it's just, I think listening is the biggest key.
Yeah. We'll end on that. I mean, I think part of the answer is also found in what Angel said, which is that, you know, we have to create a future in which, you know, former incarceration is not a mark on your ability to get a job and to build a life for yourself. And I hope that we can all commit to trying to striving to create that kind of a future. Thank you.
I'm just hopping on here really quickly just to end the conversation and to thank you, Meena, for moderating, and Kathie, Angel, Kurt, thank you so much for being on this conversation and just really talking about something that's extremely important for us, for our communities. So I really appreciate all of you being here today with us, and I appreciate everyone that's joined us. So Angel, Kathie, Kurt, Meena, I don't know if you're interested, but if anyone has any further questions and they want to contact you, maybe drop your emails or some kind of way people can communicate with you on the chat box. And once again, thank you so much for tonight.